We're a bit late to this one, but it's still worth talking about. After 4 years, the sequel to Santa Monica's tour de force God of War hit shelves in November, with the final piece of Kratos' Norse saga. And so here we are to answer the question, is God of War Ragnarok worth your time? But before we get started, we just wanted to say thank you to the subscribers that we've got so far. We reached 200 subscribers so much faster than we thought we could, and it proved to us that it's worth carrying on. So thank you to those that subscribed, and if you're new to the channel, consider subbing if you enjoy the video. Right, back to God of War. We pick up with Kratos and Atreus a few years after the ending of God of War 2018, and are immediately faced with the consequences of our actions, with the vengeful Freya coming after our two protagonists. The opening hour is one of the best in gaming and immediately tells us that the scope of Ragnarok is going to be significantly bigger than the original. The consistent thread throughout the story is destiny, and if we're bound by fate and prophecy to tread a path already set out for us. And this leads us on a winding journey through lovingly crafted realms and a hugely expanded cast of characters. It doesn't spend nearly as much time on Kratos and Atreus as the first game, but it doesn't need to. We had that in the original. This is about where they go from there, the adventure of getting there, and the characters they meet along the way. Each of the new casts is memorable and unique. Richard Schiff gives us a mesmerising performance in his turn as Odin, leaving us never quite knowing his end goal. If you're looking for the stoic and heroic Odin from the MCU, you're not going to find him here. He's always scheming and seemingly 2 steps ahead of your team. Reinhardt's Thor is a brooding hulk of a man who carries the weight of his past on his ginormous shoulders and every devastating swing of his hammer. And Freya's pain and lust for vengeance comes through in lines spoken through clenched teeth and heartbroken screams. I could name every actor in the list and make this video 30 minutes long, as everyone shines in their expanded and pivotal roles. Sindri and Atreus' relationship has blossomed into a true friendship and is a joy to watch develop, and Ragnarok's version of Surtur is now one of my favourite characters in gaming. That's not to say Kratos and Atreus don't grow as characters from the original, they absolutely do, and there are some particularly touching moments between Atreus and Kratos that, if I'm being honest, were quite emotional. Even the opening hour is an absolute roller coaster of emotion, with adrenaline pumping spectacular fights to quiet moments pondering death and our time in life. Once that hour-long intro to the game is over, I genuinely sighed a breath of relief that, at least for a little bit of time, I could relax. Throughout the story, we're faced with revelation after revelation, paying off on all the questions raised in the original. The time we spend with Angerboda in particular provides us an insight into Atreus' role in his story and how pivotal he's going to be to the events of Ragnarok. The story is a winding path with twists and turns at every corner and carrying you along for every beat, and that brings me to my next point. God of War Ragnarok is an absolute masterclass in pacing. I played the game on the second highest difficulty and completed the main story and most of the side content in about 55 hours. And at no point did it feel like a drag. It beautifully balances moments of calm with heart-stopping action. You're regularly brought to new realms just as the story of the realm you're currently in starts to run out of steam. The decision to wrap up the saga in 2 games was a decision I was initially concerned with because I didn't see how they could tie off all the loose ends. But in reality, it's led to a clear and concise tale that never lets up. When the credits did finally roll, I sat back and thought, this is one of the most touching, jaw-dropping, tear-jerking, wow-inducing and complete stories I've been through in my 20 years of gaming. The quality of the writing is right up there with the heavy hitters like The Last of Us and A Plague Tale, with moments where I genuinely sat back in awe, and it's all combined with a glorious combat system. And I'm happy to report it feels amazing. I do want to be very clear here, it's very much a continuation of God of War 2018. There are tweaks here and there and the combat is expanded, but if the original wasn't your cup of tea, then you'll probably struggle to find enjoyment with Ragnarok as well. It's not a bad thing in my book, it keeps its identity and expands where it needs to be expanded. Before I start on the combat properly, I'm going to pull up the parts of the original that I thought needed improvement, and we'll see if they've all been fixed. Number 1 is enemy variety, which was lacking in the original, leading us to fight the same genre constantly. Repeat bosses, with the trolls, need I say more, and an unintuitive UI. The original had slots for every piece of kit you had, so trying a new build would be a fairly long process in the menu. With these in mind, let's crack on. I was a huge fan of 2018's combat system, and much of it has carried over, but with improvements across the board. The Blades of Chaos and Axe now have more of an identity respectively. The Axe remains a single enemy focused, slower and heavier hitting tool, whilst the Blades are now much closer to their form from the OG God of War trilogy, specialising on juggling and being effective against larger groups of enemies, and you're incentivised to switch between the two with a new status effect system. Essentially, when you hit with the Axe you build up a frost meter, and once that's full, if you switch to the Blades and their fire effect, you'll be doing extra damage. This does bring me to maybe my only gripe with the game. Switching between weapons is still a bit clunky. The encouragement of swapping made me think I'd be able to switch between the Blades and Axe mid-combo and have a better flow between the two, but in keeping with God of War 2018, swapping completely halts your current combo flow, which to me is a missed opportunity. Does it ruin combat though? Absolutely not. It's still crunchy and every swing of the axe feels immense. There's a fantastic new addition with a momentum meter which fills up as you dish out damage without getting hit, and once it's full, you can activate an empowered version of whichever weapon you're currently using, and this is genuinely one of my most loved additions to the combat. It brings in a sort of constant minigame to the combat where you're focusing on not getting hit and deciding when is the best time to burn the meter. Quite honestly, it's personally my favourite combat system out there. Not only does it look genuinely incredible with animations that make me appreciate the team behind them more than ever, but it always feels like you're in control. You cannot, and I can't stress this enough, button mash. You have to pick the right tools for the job. And this brings me to the vastly improved enemy variety. God of War 2018 felt like a game made by a team whose vast majority of development time was focused on how to reboot Kratos. And this is basically confirmed by the team in the Raising Kratos documentary which I've linked above. We all know that making games is a huge undertaking, so it's likely that they simply didn't have enough time to throw in as many enemy types as we all wanted. Ragnarok, on the other hand, really shows us that the devs went all in with throwing everything they could at us. They already had the groundwork for the world and the combat from the original, and now it was about growth, and with 84 enemy types, it really shows. This isn't a case of enemies that just look different, they all require a different approach. The Asgardian armies, for example, inflict the Bifrost status effect on Kratos, which will absolutely chunk your HP if you're hit again, and this matches perfectly with their super aggressive and in-your-face combat style. And then the flip side are the Wisps, which can zip around the field and can only be taken out after hitting them with your arrows. This brings me onto the bosses, which were absolutely amazing. No longer are we facing the same trolls throughout the entire game. The variety of standard enemies carries over to the bosses as well, with some of the most memorable and difficult fights I have faced in recent years. I'm not going to get into spoiler territory, but these are fights that you remember for years to come. Not only do they look fantastic and fulfill the Viking fantasy, but they're all unique. There are some bosses that you fight that become regular enemies, but I'm more talking about the one-off story bosses here. They're innovative and have mechanics that are challenging but engaging. This game's version of the Valkyries from God of War 2018 bring 12 fights that are more like puzzles than mindless brute force. I absolutely hate when games throw in extra enemies alongside bosses that artificially increase the difficulty. But here it's done with intent and purpose and never feels like a chore. You have to think about what you're coming into the fight with, which brings me onto the improved gear system and UI. Swapping gear in the 2018 game was, let's face it, a bit of a drag. Every piece of gear had slots for runes, and if you ever wanted to swap it out it became quite the process to change it up. I'm happy to say that this is vastly improved in Ragnarok. For one, you now have a singular area for all your runes, meaning that you can keep all the runes you are currently running when chaining armor sets, without having to reslot everything. Additionally, the menus are just cleaner and even come with a helpful stats help function mapped to triangle if you ever need something explained. With Ragnarok, Santa Monica also introduced one of my all-time favourite mechanics in gaming: levelling up specific abilities by using them all. What this means is that if you're constantly using the heavy axe throw, for example, you'll unlock the ability to buff that specific ability, giving it increased stats focused on momentum building, or increased stun, or simply more damage. This leads to an organic flow of rewards throughout your playtime and also encourages experimentation. There were numerous times that I received a notification that I fully levelled an ability, which led me to then focus on another skill, meaning that the combat never started to feel stale. This brings me to my last point on the combat, and that's the companions. Atreus has grown in this story. After all, it's set a few years after the events of the first game. And as obvious as this is in the story, I mean he's a teenager after all, it also comes across clearly in the combat. He can do more, dishes out more damage, has more utility, and is an essential part of the combat system. The few times that you don't have Atreus by your side, he was sorely missed, and the challenge noticeably increased. He never feels like a piece of useless AI that is wandering around. There's many times that you're in a fight and out the corner of your eye you see him battling 2 to 3 Draugr right beside you. And this also carries into boss fights where the enemy aggro he provides was a welcome reprieve from the constant onslaught of aggression towards Kratos. The story and combat fit hand in hand, and this is helped by the one-shot style that is carried over from the first game. There were so many instances of being in a fight or exploring that could genuinely have been cutscenes but left us in control. Conquering the challenges and exploring the world with Atreus was always a joy. What a world it is! God of War Ragnarok is a living embodiment of quality over quantity. So often have we heard the phrase, "the world feels empty," in modern gaming, but nothing could be further from the truth here. Each realm you visit is lovingly crafted with a mix of linear areas and wide open vistas to explore on your boat and sled. It never felt daunting to get into a new free roam zone, the sizes of which just kind of felt right. Each time you're brought to a realm, there's a similar formula implemented. Play through the main story beat, and when that ends, a few side missions are brought to your attention, at which point you have the choice to either carry on with the main plotline or explore and do the side content. But I have to say that the side content is absolutely worth doing, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that some of the spectacle for completing these is on par with the story missions and just as emotional in parts. That alone makes them worth doing, but some of the best gear in the game is rewarded for completing the side content as well, making it well worth your time to journey off of the yellow brick road. These missions also give us tons of development for the characters we meet along the way, but mainly Mimir. In the first game, Mimir was a vehicle for comic relief and exposition, but here he becomes a fully fledged character with motivations and ambitions all of his own. We go into his background and some of the questionable decisions he made in his heyday as an Aesir god, and together face and amend the repercussions of his past. On top of these side missions, there's the usual collectibles that have made their way over from 2018, i.e. Nornir chests, normal chests, poems, etc, etc. Something that I really appreciate in God of War is that it's not really a question of finding the chests. They're always very visible and fairly obvious. It's more how do you get to them and solve them, and I'm a big fan of this approach. I've gotten a fair amount of open world fatigue just knowing that when I load into a vast world that I will spend countless hours walking into every corner just to check if there's something there, but knowing where the important collectibles are limits this feeling. The puzzles also utilise the tools you are given throughout the game. In an almost Metroidvania way, certain puzzles can't be completed until later on, but it's never frustrating, which it would have been if it was overused, because the rest of the game isn't built following the same methodology. The puzzles themselves are great fun, with new environmental tools you can use to complete them, with my personal favourite being these mirrors you can bounce the axe off of to reach new areas. I mean, just look at this! I no word of a lie stood here watching it bounce for a few minutes just because it's so damn satisfying. I'm also happy to report that the arrows of your companions go where you want them now. Gone is the relentless adjusting of your aim to hit small targets on puzzles and waiting for your companion to be within sight. If you can see it, you can hit it. And whilst you're doing all of this, you get some of the best dialogue I've experienced in any game. There were numerous occasions where I'd stop the boat and just listen to the tale that Mimir was telling us. There's even small and subtle continuations in these quiet moments that link back to the original, with Kratos now being able to read basic runes, something that he struggled with during his first journey. All of this makes Ragnarok's world a dense and thoroughly enjoyable playground for your journey with Kratos. The amount of content is truly a sight to behold. I was really disappointed when the industry moved up to the £70 price point for new games, but in the case of Ragnarok, I truly felt it was worth it. I mean, there's an area called the Crater you get access to in the latter third of the game, which has easily 2 to 3 hours of content in it, and it's completely optional. And through all of this, I want to call out the music, which is incredible. Each and every moment has a soundtrack to match it, with pounding drums for action and soft melancholic melodies for the more poignant moments. On top of this, there isn't a microtransaction in sight, and if you've been following the channel, you know how we feel about those. God of War Ragnarok blew me away. The deep, meaningful journey you undertake with Kratos and Atreus, the hugely expanded cast of characters, the crunchy, satisfying combat with dazzling displays of brutality, and the ending to one of the greatest sagas in gaming is an experience that will stay with me for years to come. This raises the question, is God of War Ragnarok my favourite game of all time? It's definitely part of the conversation. But the answer to is God of War Ragnarok worth your time? Yes, it absolutely is. Every single second of it.